You know what? I think we've done the necessary amount of waiting. We can get started. And so welcome everyone again to this Weight Placer AI webinar, Retail 2024, the CPG perspective. We're so excited that you are here today, and we are thrilled to be joined by two amazing guests. First off, we have David Schwartz, the Managing Director of Category Management, Market Research, Consumer and Shopper Insights at Conair. David, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
And our own Alea Jordan, formerly of Target and IRI, but most importantly of Placer. Alea Jordan, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
And so let's give a quick introduction to what we're going to do today. We're going to start with a very brief introduction to Placer for those of you who are somehow unfamiliar still. Then we will go through the content that we have prepared for today. And as always, we will take your questions. If you have a question at any point throughout the conversation, please use the Q&A button situated at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on how you have Zoom configured. Please send those over at any point. We'll try to get to them either within the course of the conversation at the end, kind of whenever they come in. So introduction. Placer is a location data company. What does that mean? People vote with their feet. Show you how they vote across the United States every single day. We do that by analyzing a panel of tens of millions of devices. Very critically, it is all de-identified aggregate data, so we are GDPR and CCPA compliant. We then analyze that data with AI and machine learning algorithms in order to make estimations of visits to retail locations across the country. And we present that data in a wealth of different reports on our platform on everything from visit frequency, customer demographics, the visitor journey, visit trends, and a whole lot more. If anyone is interested in the platform, we have a free version of our premium product available at placer.ai. We also have a section on our website called The Square, which is the home to our free tools. So please check those out. But now it is time to get into it. And let's start with the necessary look back. And David, I'll start with you here. What was your biggest takeaway from holiday retail performance?
Well, holiday retail performance was definitely interesting. What we were seeing and we've been seeing is a slowdown in foot traffic, definitely from year over year perspective. So it really helped us to understand, you know, comparing our numbers internally to the external numbers that we were seeing from Placer and saying, okay, you know, our sales trending at the same rate as the foot traffic slowdown, or are they not? And were we over, you know, lapping that rate? So that's what we saw. We expected some sort of slowdown because of the economy and some of the weighing in on the, you know, the consumers' pockets.
Alea, same question to you. What did you see from the holiday period, and how does it kind of inform your perspective on retail currently?
I think what was really interesting was what we were seeing around value and seeing that how it played across all consumer segments. And so even at the top, you're seeing things like they're searching for value in terms of package size. So maybe it's not the price on the shelf, but the price per. So they might go up in pack size because it's cheaper on the each. So I found that to be quite interesting, as well as the pecking and hunting. And so seeing the foot traffic in like those, what we would deem value areas. Five Below, TJ Maxx, people are fine to go bargain and hunt and find the things they want, particularly around that holiday time as well. So I found that to be pretty interesting, seeing those changes in consumer behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the interesting things is also the way which kind of categories were hit. And obviously, kind of the data that came out about spend was not including kind of taking into account inflation. But to see things like home furnishings down, whereas products like self-care were up, kind of aligns with what we've been seeing in terms of if there is a purchase that I feel like I can push off and isn't as necessary, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to try and maximize my dollars in that way. I think one of the things, and Alea, I'll start with you here. I think one of the things that we've seen a lot in recent years is just volatility between channels. And one of the things you do is you work very closely with a lot of our CPG customers. You come from that background. When you see how there are changes within these channels and how that strategy has to shift accordingly, how big of a deal with it is this? How much does it impact the way that a CPG company should be viewing the retail landscape?
Mm-hmm. I think paying attention to the shifts are going to be important with for planning purposes. As we're thinking about assortment and different strategies and things of that nature, why are people shifting? Again, are people leaving traditional grocery and going to these superstores and such as perceived value? Look at the dollar channel, the stuff they're putting on their shelves and how different that looks and the different needs that they're meeting now that they weren't meeting in the past. I think we really have to pay attention. And even you go all the way over to convenience and how people are engaging with those and wanting it to be more experiential. And they're not just stopping in for gas. That's a meal. That's a lunch stop. Like it's not, it's a restaurant, situation now. So when we're thinking from a CPG perspective, we have to understand the shifts and why and how people are consuming these brick and mortar and being in these spaces to see how we might want to change the strategy. How do we react? How do we show up differently in those spaces to align with the consumer needs?
That's such a great point because as convenience kind of evolves, it changes the orientation of like what products I'm going to be interested in within that space. David, from your perspective, it's not just because I think it's an important clarification. Like we're not just talking about volatility of like, oh, the last 6 months or the last year. It feels like, again, this 4 year period by this stage of ongoing volatility and channel shifts. How do you build real distribution strategies when there is so much change in the market?
Well, I would have to say here that, and aligning with what Aaliyah has said, is, you can see the grocery channel saw an uptick, and that's because a lot of people, they were not going out to eat, so they're eating at home more. So, there are more trips. And also that has to do with the stretching of the wallet. That if they can't go and stock up, they're going to go more times based on their pay rate. Another thing that we've seen, and I'll get to your question, is also that we've seen this. How can I say, different two different ends of the spectrum. So the beauty category, the foot traffic was increasing in the beauty category. Sales were going up because people were still into their self care and their high end products. They wanted to look beautiful. However, we also then saw on the other end of the spectrum, the lower income levels going to the value channel. So there was this split in direction with the consumer, depending on who the consumer was. And what that did is that changed the whole dynamic as far as, well, what are we going to lean into? How are we going to lean into it? And where we're going to lean into it.
No, I mean it is crazy because you think about again, I think convenience stores are this amazing example. We'll discuss this in a little bit more detail in just a second, but you think about, just things like hybrid work. Like if it used to be that kind of that convenience store trip next to the gas station, I'm going to the office, I'm running in, I'm getting gas, and I want to go get myself a snack for the road. But like Alea said, it's not just the fact that maybe I'm going to the office less. It's my expectation of what I'm getting from the convenience store has changed as well, which means the types of products that I'm going to be interested in or not interested in that I might have been a staple for me in the past. And these are really significant changes. I mean, David, I'll start with you for this. When you think about like kind of the Conair family of products, there are those that get a boost from, office visits, people being out and about, there being more events. You think of this return, how do you maximize such a wide portfolio of products when you have this mix of, hey, there's opportunities of like, oh, everyone's coming back to the office and we're going back to events, but at the same time, this other product segment is being limited by some of the changes in behavior. Like, how do you find that balance?
Well, I think the balance comes from planning. Um, Looking at the historical trends, trying to anticipate what those trends are going to be and where they're going to be in the next year or two, and how are we going to adjust our mix? How are we going to adjust our offering, our product offering? And again, it comes down to it's the four P's. It's it's where are we going to put it, and what price are we going to put it at, and how are we going to promote it? Um, those are all the factors that come into play. People returning to the office, again, ladies, we're in a beauty industry that like to beautify more. So you're going to see more expense on curling irons. We're seeing a trend in curling irons because they want to style their hair. We're seeing, garment steamers trending up because people are, getting the wrinkles out of their clothing. They're going back to the office. So those are things that you have to plan for as well as you're seeing the trends in the data.
Yeah, I know this is going to shock you. I haven't used a curling iron in a very long time, but the clothing
Yeah,
steamers
neither have
are they are gold on the conference trail. Do you think? I mean, because you talk about the planning, to what extent? I want to follow up. To what extent has the planning been more challenging in the last few years? Has there been like a big takeaway for you of like we need to plan how I plan differently or how that approach has changed because of what we've seen in recent years?
Yeah. I would say the planning is challenging because of the online segment.
Mhm.
You start including the Amazons of the world and the shift that's occurring there as well, where consumers are purchasing, face it, as gas prices go up, consumers are purchasing more online. And
Mhm.
so that also has an effect on are they going to go out to the store or not? So that also, you know, without giving too much detail, is really about, well, again, what products are we going to produce? How many, how are we going to sell it in, and then you get into price competition there, so you have to be careful about how you're laying that out.
That's a great point. Alea, when you think about like the wider economic uncertainty, hybrid work, return to office, all of these elements happening at the same time,
Mhm.
what does it mean for the way you view kind of the state of the consumer overall today?
I think it's shifting. And when I think I'm going to kind of answer this from the perspective of supporting CPG clients and what's important for us to pay attention to with the consumers is how different they are from market to market. And everything that David said, I think we also have to consider how can we work with what we have in the midst of building new strategies. And I think it's a fine line because we don't want to run and make these changes when a place things are so uncertain. But if we understand that markets, one, look different. So, of course, migration can help us there. Things look different post COVID than they did. Behaviors are changing and they may not have hit normal. Maybe they have. We're all trying to figure that out, but we have to approach them differently. So, while we may not be able to pull the lever of changing product or changing price, we can be focused on one, two, three markets. How do we promote differently? How do we change the messaging from a digital advertising perspective so that we're reaching out to them in a way that it not only resonates, but it says we know you, we know what you're looking for, we know what you need, and how can we mix that message up in a way that's efficient for our pockets as we're doing that. So I think we're learning. Let's find some low cost ways that can be really, really impactful and really, really targeted with our consumers to say, hey, we want to meet you where you are and meet your needs.
Yeah, I really want to double down on that point because especially when you think about like digital spend,
Mhm.
it is usually the easiest to change, right?
Yep.
So it's the easiest for us to make tweaks on, have multiple variations of, and therefore kind of push different ideas. I even think like we can't minimize how significant these shifts are because they are very powerful, and there's some that are more lasting than others. But people moving is a big shift. I think one of the big, and we've been talking about this, for months now, but this conversation around is retailer X closing a store in New York City because of shrink? The answer is usually no. They're closing it because their audience isn't there anymore. They're closing it because their audience moved from New York City to Connecticut or New Jersey or, Long Island, and now they have to change to be there with them. And these transitions of audience come with massive opportunities and that ability to kind of poke the markets, try to identify what it is that resonates, and to do so in an efficient manner, like you said, Alea, massive opportunity. And it also fits in perfectly because we're going from digital media now to in-store, which is my favorite topic in the world. And Alea, I'll start with you. If I asked you to be in charge of building out a physical in-store retail media network, how would you create it so that it is as beneficial as possible for CPG customers?
Created so it's has been it's gonna have to be flexible. It's gonna have to be flexible, and we have to find a way to measure and understand reach. Because if we are putting things out there and we can't analyze and then react quickly, this is a huge investment that could backfire. So I think you have to build it in a way, like I said, it's flexible and it's measurable. And if I come in understanding that a Conair is going to need something that looks very, very different than a P&G or, someone that's a food manufacturer. And so figuring out where we can offer a sense of flexibility, some measurable things that we can say, hey, halfway through this campaign or quarter through this campaign, yes, they're doing what we said we wanted them to do. They're going where we wanted them to go and picking up what. But if not, how can we quickly act and make some shifts? So it has to be flexible if we're thinking about building it for everyone.
I think the idea of flexible and measurable is huge.
Yeah.
David, did you want to follow in on that?
Yeah, I want to add to that. The most important part of it is, and it's what we do well, is having a relationship with the retailer themselves. The retailer has to know their consumer. They have to know how their consumer is shifting, and they also have to be flexible. That flexibility is extremely important. Um, I know of two retailers, which will name nameless, but there are certain things that we can do, but because of operational things within their the four walls, they can't do it. But if they could, it would just open up the floodgates as far as increased consumption and giving people what they want, when they want it, where they want it. And it's so imperative to have that, um, because if you don't, there's many surveys that I've done where you ask the guest, if you go into a store and they don't have it, what do you do next? 75% of the responses, I'm going on my cell phone, I'm ordering it from Amazon, and I'm just going to have it delivered tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so this, and it's really a struggle. It's a struggle between how do you compete online, but also how are you competing in store, and then how are you playing that. There's an inventory factor here that retailers don't want to weigh in on their inventory because of cost, etc. So these are the challenges, and this rapid shifting of people really can make it challenging to get a hold of.
I think there's something so important about what you're saying because it also this is the balance that retailers, if they want retail media and brick and mortar to be as powerful as retail media has been in the worlds of kind of Amazon, et cetera, it has to be focused on maximizing the in-store experience. Because if you're just going to turn stores into a showroom where people could then make their ultimate purchase online, you're losing out as the retailer. Whereas if you can ensure that these strategies are aligned and there's, you talk about flexibility, the benefits of being able to keep someone in the physical environment is so important and so valuable to these retailers. I'm very excited what's going to happen this year because, I think there's a lot of focus on how does this segment take its next step. So it's I think there's a lot of recognition that the promise is there and that the excitement is legitimate. But for it to be what it can be, it needs to be built around, it shouldn't be, hey, how do we replicate what Amazon did online in the store? It needs to be, how do we create a unique and exciting, media experience that takes advantage of the benefits of the store that aren't there online? I mean, I
Yeah.
wonder from both of your perspectives, because there is an element here where product companies have in many ways been doing retail media since before we were calling it retail media, end caps and sponsorships and promotions within stores. From that perspective where you essentially were in the space before the space was there, what does the retailer need to think about? Alea, you mentioned flexibility and making sure it's measurable. I mean, David, for you, and Alea, if you have others as well, what are the key things that the retailer needs to be thinking about?
Oh, they definitely, again, it comes down to the consumer. They have to be thinking about their guests. At the end of the day, people love to shop.
Yep.
They do. They love to shop. They love to peruse. They love to browse. They love to go and look at things and touch things. And I think there's part of, I don't want to sound old school here. It's just there's part of that shopping element that has gone away.
Yep.
Because it's gone away because either, yes, some of the consumers may not want it, but some of the retailers may have taken it away. So again, it's how do you create that in-store environment, to your point, that's enjoyable, that I love it. I love coming here. It's an experience. It makes me happy. I find good bargains, and I get through the register pretty quickly. Those are the key points. It doesn't. It's not. I'm not saying anything that nobody else doesn't already know. And so it's like to me the recipe isn't overly complex.
I'm gonna tweak it a teeny bit because I think that all those things are necessary to keep people coming back. But I think what keeps me personally off my phone is when I go in, it feels like they know me. This store is for me, the flavors, the taste, the brands, the types, the things that are there. So that assortment, what you're highlighting, even small things, like if I'm watching a screen and there's a Black woman with natural hair, you know what I mean? If that's the space I'm in, those small things that shows you understand your audience, who's coming into this store, what they're looking for. And I think there's ways that you don't have to do it at the store level. You can segment stores in groups and have enough information to make it feel very personal when people walk in. And that's something that they're not going to get on, online.
That I think that especially with digital screens, the capacity to kind of be much more these six stores in this area and those two stores there and these three stores somewhere totally different are all going to have this similar message because that's the audience that walks in. One of my favorite examples of amazing retail is, I was in Florida, South Florida for Passover 5 or 6 years ago, and they had a Passover pop-up in three locations. Now, those three locations, it was a draw. That community was like, oh, look, Publix is really showing that they're in this holiday spirit with us.
Yeah.
And it was packed. People were really excited. And the product companies that were selling their wares there had these really exciting little stations, and it was a fun experience in the supermarket. Would that same experience have worked in the middle of Des Moines, Iowa? Probably not. But this ability to segment stores and have the right experience in them, I think it's really engaging for product companies because it tells you the retailer has a deep understanding of who each store is speaking to and then therefore how to maximize that shopper journey. I want to talk about a topic that I get really excited about, but I do have to remind myself sometimes to slow down because it's obviously complex. But the idea of owned retail, and Alea, I'll start with you here, but I always think about like kind of Apple and, all these other companies they are the product companies, but now they are also kind of the retailer too. But there's the more kind of side examples, like, I don't know, having, the M&M store is one of my favorite examples. What is the value of owning retail spaces for a CPG company? And do you think this is something that has potential scale?
I do. I think the value is still there. We all talk about digital and digital shaking up the space. I don't think we're in a space where we can get rid of having physical stores. Like we need that there to have that experience. One, and the example you use with Apple, I think it goes back to those consumers they have a cult following, like people are loyal. And we see a lot of that on some of those direct to consumer places that don't necessarily have it. And that translation of when they show up and have a brick and mortar space. I don't know. Shein, they did those pop-ups and people went crazy for the pop-ups, and who would have known, who would have thought. And I think that people still have that desire to touch and feel and see things. We still have a lot of people my, parents' age who aren't trusting of Amazon as much. We have some that are on the cusp. It's important that we find ways to engage with our consumers, and it has to be a step above a standard walk into this brick building and it be just stuff.
And
So yeah,
it doesn't need to be, apologies for cutting up, but it doesn't need to be just about the transaction. It could be
right.
about the experience and the relationship. I mean, David, your space is a little bit more complicated from that perspective, but when you think overall from a CPG perspective, how do you see when you watch like, CPG companies having kind of these owned locations? How big do you think this trend gets? Do you think there's like a clear cap on it, or do you think it has kind of real ongoing growth potential?
Oh, I think it has ongoing growth potential. We've done a number of things with retailers. And again, it really comes down to your partnership with the retailer and how you're going to use the different tools that you have um, to understand their consumer and then really find out what that consumer wants. We just did this with one of the major retailers to find out what did their consumers think of the shelf space? What did they want to see the shelf space become? What kind of merchandising, what type of graphics, what type of signage. And, we find out that these consumers are looking for clear experience. They're looking for knowledge. They're looking to be, told what to buy and why, and why is it so important. And again, it's not always about price. It's about the experience that you're giving them, that they feel that they're going here, especially with beauty, it's about a solution. They're coming here, they're going to get a solution. They're going to get the right solution with the right product at the right price, and feel good about it. And yes, I think things like that are going to continue to grow because they're going to have to grow.
I think this channel has such huge growth potential because of that lasting nature of the experience, the memories, etc. For me, it's, like I'm a Southeast Pennsylvania person. I went to Hershey World. I went through the whole thing and tried that product. And like, does that give me a greater level of affinity to those products? Of course. Of course it does. And the idea though that really kind of shook me was speaking to a consultant once who was saying, why doesn't it make sense for Black and Decker to have retail locations where you come in and you get to try tools and they give classes and they embed you in this experience of the product? I think there's a very high amount of potential in that space. But what it's based on is essentially this understanding of the balance between online to offline, offline owned, offline through wholesale partners, but online as well. I mean, David, from your perspective, when you're thinking about omni and that digital physical balance, how do you identify the right mix in order to like maximize those channels and their ability to help you reach all of your audiences in the channel that they want to be reached on?
Yeah, that's a tough one because everybody wants to be like everybody else. If there's one channel that's growing, everybody wants to know what that channel is doing and they want to implement it. So, that's not it's easier said than done. Again, the challenge with retail is you have limited store space. So ultimately you want to have the best selling products, of course, at the shelf. It's from there where how can I say, your product repertoire can get expanded to online. It's then the challenge. That's where the challenge comes. Is how do you get somebody who's in store who may be looking for something to then go online with that store. So, for instance, if I'm going to a beauty retailer and I shop in that beauty retailer and I don't find what I want, am I really going to go to that beauty retailer's website to buy it? Or am I going to go to the other online channel to buy it? And then what do they, and again, this comes back to having a relationship with the internal retailer people to develop things like that, so that we're giving the customer value or we're giving them direction on how to do that. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's I can't give specific details here, but that is, those are the challenges that are faced with an omni-channel world. Because it's very competitive. It's always competitive on price. It's always competitive on selection. So, those are, it's easy for me to say these things. It's very hard to do.
I think that is the biggest thing about Omni. I mean, Alea, from your perspective, when you think about the omni-channel opportunities, how has your perspective on kind of Omni changed in the last few years? And what do you think is missing in order to make this maximizing that balance between online and offline? What do you think is missing to make that possible or more or maximized?
I think it's small things like connection. What David said, how do we send them to if where they're in, that retailer to that retailer's website? A few years ago, I supported a manufacturer and they made baby products. And it was small, but adding a QR code at shelf to show this product line has a continuation. and people could scan it right there. They could get additional information. And that thing can show you not only where you can shop, not only other products, use cases, ways to use it, etc. I think making the connection for them, and it's not always as easy as a QR code, but finding ways at the retailer to show, here's what we have to offer. Here's why we have these things here. And yes, we can give them an experience here, but we're teaching them something or showing them something as we're directing them. When I get to the website, I don't want it to just be boxes. If I can find a system, a solution, a kit, I'll spend more time on the website. If I know when I go directly to their website, I'm going to get a video and you know what I mean? It's going to share some different things that you're not going to get on Amazon. It starts to make that connection piece that you were giving them in store with that experience also translates to Omni. So now we're becoming more loyal to the brand as a whole. So I don't know. I think it's a tough one, but connection can help bridge that gap a bit.
No, I think it's a great, it's the connection is the missing piece. I think, we were talking once with a colleague once. We were doing a webinar and they were saying, we said omni-channel is one of the most important things to be looking at, and they were like, "Oh, ha ha ha! What is this, 1998?" And we were like, "Show us where it's happening well. Show me the place where the product isn't there and I can find it on the website, get it sent to my house." There's a lot of omni thinking and there's a lot of omni desire. The execution is lagging, and I think first of all, it's really hard. It's really difficult to do. But I think that speaks to the massive opportunity that still exists there with some of these small steps forward. Ale, I'll stay with you. One of the areas that's been really fascinating for us is when you have products that kind of sit within this really magic area of all of a sudden everyone wants them. So think mid-pandemic, it was DIY or patio furniture. Now self-care, beauty products are obviously all the rage. There was candles were a bit, you just have products that kind of hit that moment in time where it's all turning up effective and well. What is the ideal way from your perspective to lean into one of those opportunities?
Oh, those are hard because it's not always predictive, but I live by the adage, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. And so I think as we're thinking about stuff like that, it comes into how are we prepared on every level? Do we know where our inventory is? Do we know if our stores are segmented in a certain way, then I know, hey, you have an overage, they have an under, we can do some inner DC transfers and start getting it where it needs to go. I mean, it's really looking at it throughout the entire pipeline from that consumer perspective in ways that we can impact and be ready. And I know it's easier said than done, but when you have a strategy that aligns, now, like I said, we can send this over there when it needs to go over there. We know the zip codes where this messaging would align. So let's blast out some stuff quickly in these spaces so that we can capitalize in those areas. So I think it's small stuff, and then understanding, having someone on the ground paying attention to those trends to say, if you're out, how can we transition them into something else we have by showing them, another use case for a similar or like item. So it's really just understanding what they need and how you can support those needs and act quickly is what I think is that sweet spot there.
It's a great point. David, your perspective on this as well. When you kind of have this product that gets these positive tailwinds, or you see a channel that you're using get these tailwinds. I mean, you talked about planning. It's kind of the anti-plan. Like, how do you balance that need to hopefully be able to move quickly when everything kind of aligns in your favor while at the same time being planned?
Well, with any manufacturer, that really depends on your distribution channel and your distribution structure. For us, yeah, again, it comes down to planning and being ahead of the curve. But one thing I wanted to add here, one thing that Placer AI is great for, and people have really not explored it yet that I've seen, is how do manufacturers leverage the foot traffic patterns of all the different retailers and look at correlations within different areas and try to use different types of channels to drive people to different retailers. Little bit out there in a concept, but for an imagine, you're going to Burger King, and oh, by the way, there's a retailer out there that would love more foot traffic. Well, why can't I get that Burger King person to come over to that retailer? That might be happening. That might be in a proximity of the other stores. So there's lots of to me, there's always potential.
What we love about playing with data is I think there's always these really exciting ways to uncover how people are changing and how they're interacting. And when you can uncover, when you understand the consumer, and I think David, you mentioned this multiple times, when you start with what's driving the consumer, where is the consumer, what's motivating them, how do they look differently in different areas? That's where the magic starts coming in terms of the ideas we can deploy and the strategies we can kind of utilize to drive the values we're looking for. We're gonna end here. This is my favorite question. David, I'll start with you and Ali, I'll go to you with the same one. Give me one bold prediction for 2024. And you can do whatever you want, but you are being judged on boldness. David, do you want to kick us off?
Oh, here we go. I get the first play. I have to be careful here. Um, my bold prediction is, well, it's not a bold prediction. It's prediction. It's an election year. It's going to get interesting. I think it's going to be a year of a lot of emotional tension, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of stress for consumers. So I think, really manufacturers need to, and again, this is my opinion and my opinion only, is that I think it'll be, there's always a way to sell something in any market. It's just how, we have to be really smart about how we're going to go about, uh, you know, our sales and our promotions based on the timing of things. What are we going to sell? What price points? Based on these emotional factors that we have no control over. Really, we don't.
I think it's such an amazing point. We talked about this a bunch when kind of the economic impacts were almost at their peak of
Yes,
this isn't just financial, it's emotional and psychological for the consumer.
yes,
It's uncertainty, it's fear, and so when you're communicating and messaging with someone and you're in a situation where you understand that, you're changing the way that you communicate in order to make sure it resonates. And I think that piece of this year is going to come with some tension and some stress. It's a very, very important message. And yeah, I like the way you tweaked it because I thought the fact that you did telling us that it was an election year, not so bold, but you increased the boldness with the follow on. I agree. Alea, one bold prediction for 2024.
I was going somewhere different, but based off what David said, I think that the bold prediction is going to be how manufacturers and brands show up in the midst of these trying times and like what's
Mhm.
highlighted, what's not, who takes a stance, who doesn't. We've seen how that impacts consumer behavior. And we know throughout the United States, there's pockets. And so honing in and knowing who your consumer is and where they are, because there are some areas that are way more political than others, some that are way more conservative than others. You go back to the Target Pride thing. Some regions saw huge impacts and others saw none at all. And
Mhm.
so I think understanding that online presence, brand awareness, how your brand is showing up, you have to be very, very thoughtful in how you show up, especially in times like this. And the consumers are telling you how they feel with their pockets. And they're also guarding them at the same time because we're still on the will there be a recession? Won't there? Will there? What should I be doing with my money? My savings is dwindling. Inflation is still a little high. So they're going to start being a little more choosy. Does this brand stand for what I stand for? So I think they have to be bold in the statements they make and be ready for the consumers to tell you how they feel about that statement with their dollars.
Great point. And with that, David, Alea, thank you so much both for being here. This was so much fun. Everyone, thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it as always. And hopefully you'll join us again for the next one. Alea, David, thank you again.
Thank you.
And everyone have a wonderful day. See you on the next one.